How my father's alcohol addiction ruined the family. The first time I realized my father had a problem, I was 8 years old. It was a Saturday afternoon, the kind that should have been filled with warmth, laughter, and the simple joys of childhood. My mother had promised we would go to the park. She had even packed sandwiches, juice boxes, and a blanket for us to sit on. I'd been so excited, bouncing on the balls of my feet as I waited for my father to get ready. But he never did. Instead, he stumbled out of his bedroom, reeking of something bitter and sharp, his eyes unfocused, his shirt buttoned wrong. He slurred something about later, maybe later, before collapsing onto the couch, his heavy breathing filling the silent room. My mother's expression was blank, too blank, like she had already lived this moment too many times before. She quietly unpacked the picnic basket, her movements slow and careful, like if she just pretended nothing was wrong, then maybe it wouldn't be. I didn't understand it then. Not fully. But I did know one thing. We never went to the park that day. And after that, it seemed like we never went anywhere again. As the years passed, the drinking became the third member of our household. The unseen presence that dictated every decision, every conversation, every ruined moment. At first, my father tried to hide it. He kept the bottles tucked behind the cereal boxes in the back of the cabinet where only he knew to reach. He disguised the smell with cheap breath mints and cologne, pretending everything was normal. But addiction is greedy. It never stays hidden for long. Soon he stopped bothering with excuses. Soon he stopped pretending at all. He came home late, stumbling through the front door with glassy eyes and slurred words, his voice too loud, his steps too heavy. Dinner would grow cold on the table, my mother sitting across from an empty chair, her fingers curled into fists beneath the tablecloth. Some nights, she tried to fight it, tried to reason with him, to remind him of the bills piling up, the jobs he had lost, the promises he had broken. And some nights, she didn't say anything at all. Some nights she just sat there, staring past him, past me, past everything, her silence heavier than the shouting ever was. By the time I was 12, the disasters became routine. Missed school events, expected, birthday parties forgotten. Nothing new. A father who wasn't really there, even when he was physically in the room. That was just life. The rare moments of sobriety were worse than the drunk ones, because those were the times when he would look at me with guilt in his eyes, ruffling my hair and calling me kiddo, making grand promises about how he was going to change this time. Those were the nights when he would sit at the edge of my bed, his breath still tinged with liquor from the night before, and whisper, "I swear, I'll be better. I love you, okay? I love you more than anything." And I believed him. Every single time. Because I was a kid. And kids don't know that sometimes love isn't enough. The fights between my parents got worse. What used to be quiet arguments in the kitchen turned into screaming matches that shook the walls. I would lie in bed, gripping the sheets, staring at the ceiling as my mother's voice cracked with pleas and frustration, as my father's words slurred into something ugly and cruel. Then came the crashes, the sound of glass shattering, of something heavy hitting the wall. Sometimes the fights ended in silence. Sometimes they ended with my mother packing a bag and sitting in the car for an hour before coming back inside. Her shoulders slumped in defeat. But no matter what, they always ended the same way. With my father drunk, with my mother tired, with me wondering how much longer we could keep pretending we were still a family. By the time I was 16, I had stopped hoping. I stopped waiting for my father to show up for anything, stopped believing his slurred apologies, stopped caring when he forgot my birthday for the third year in a row. I learned to navigate around the chaos. I got a job, paid for my own school supplies, made excuses to my teachers when I came in exhausted because I had spent the night making sure my father didn't pass out on the front lawn. I picked up the pieces of our broken home, all while my mother held on to a hope that had long since died in me. "He's sick," she would say. "Addiction is a disease. He needs help." And I would nod, pretending I didn't hear the shaking in her voice, pretending I didn't see the way she held her breath every time he walked through the door, pretending I still cared enough to wait for him to change. The breaking point came on a cold winter night. I remember the smell of burnt toast in the air, the dim light of the kitchen, the way the house felt like a pressure cooker about to explode. My father had been drinking all day, worse than usual. When he stumbled inside that night, there was nothing left of the man I had once called Dad. Just a shell, a shadow of what could have been. His words were nonsensical, his movements erratic, his eyes wild. My mother tried to talk him down, tried to get him to go to bed, but he wasn't listening. And then, out of nowhere, he swung at her. It wasn't a full-force hit. It wasn't even intentional. But it was enough. Enough to send her stumbling backward. Enough to make her gasp in shock, pressing a trembling hand to her face. Enough to make my entire world tilt on its axis. I moved without thinking. 1 second I was frozen. The next, I was shoving him, hard, watching him stumble back, his drunken brain struggling to catch up with what had just happened. And in that moment, I wasn't scared anymore. I was furious. "You need to leave," I said, my voice steady, cold, final. His bloodshot eyes flicked between me and my mother, confusion and rage warring inside him. "This is my house." "Not anymore." I saw something close to fear flash across his face. Because he knew. He knew that I wasn't a kid anymore. I wasn't waiting for him to change. I wasn't hoping he'd be better. I was done. My mother didn't stop him when he packed a bag that night. She didn't beg him to stay. She didn't whisper about how he just needed help, about how this wasn't really him. She just stood there, arms wrapped around herself, watching as he walked out the door and into the cold night. The house was silent. He tried to come back. Of course he did. Addicts always do. There were phone calls, slurred voicemails full of "I miss yous" and "I swear I'll get betters." There were promises. There were regrets. There were excuses. But I didn't listen. Because I had spent my entire life trying to save a man who didn't want to be saved. And now, I was saving myself instead. The silence in the house after my father left should have been comforting. It should have felt like a long-awaited relief, like a heavy storm finally breaking after years of endless rain. But silence is a strange thing. It doesn't always bring peace. Sometimes it settles into the walls like a ghost, filling every empty space with the echoes of everything that came before. And my father's absence wasn't just a missing presence. It was a void, a gaping wound that had been left open for so long that we didn't even know how to function without the pain anymore. For the first few days, my mother barely spoke. She moved through the house like a shadow, her hands gripping the edges of countertops, tables, anything solid, as if she needed to anchor herself. She still made coffee for 2 in the mornings, even though there was no one to drink the second cup. She still left the porch light on at night, like she expected him to stumble back home at any moment, full of apologies and slurred promises. I didn't bother telling her to stop, because some part of me knew. She needed this. She needed the illusion that things could still be undone, that the life she had built with him hadn't completely fallen apart. But I knew better. There was no undoing this. There was only moving forward, whether she was ready or not. The first time he tried to come back, it was barely a week later. I had just gotten home from work, the winter air still clinging to my skin, when I spotted his car parked in the driveway. The sight of it made my stomach twist, an old instinct kicking in, a reflex built from years of bracing myself whenever he came home in a mood I couldn't predict. But this time, I wasn't a kid waiting to be disappointed. I was someone who had finally set a boundary, and I wasn't about to let him cross it. The second I stepped inside, I knew he had already started working on her. He was sitting at the kitchen table, looking disheveled but not entirely wasted, just enough to make himself appear pathetic, pitiful, like he had been struggling to survive out there without us, like he had been punished enough. My mother sat across from him, her hands trembling as she clutched the cup of coffee she had made for him, like nothing had changed, like this was just another morning where he'd eventually sober up and pretend everything was fine. Her eyes flicked to me as I entered, full of uncertainty, like she was waiting for me to decide how this would go, like she already knew she didn't have the strength to stop him. I dropped my bag by the door, crossing my arms as I stared at the man who had spent my entire life breaking us piece by piece. "What are you doing here?" My voice was flat, devoid of emotion. He lifted his gaze slowly, his bloodshot eyes glassy but calculating. "I just wanted to talk," he said, his voice hoarse. "I think I deserve that much, don't I?" I let out a short, humorless laugh. You think you deserve something from us? He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face like he was exhausted, like we were the ones making things difficult for him. Look, I know I messed up. I know things got bad. Bad? I repeated, raising an eyebrow. Is that what we're calling years of drinking, lying, and ruining everything in your path? Bad? His jaw tightened. I'm trying here. I glanced at my mother, at the way her fingers were curled so tightly around her mug that her knuckles had gone white. She wasn't looking at me anymore, because she wanted to believe him, because this was the cycle, the endless, inescapable pattern of breaking and forgiving and breaking again, and I refused to be part of it anymore. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. If you came here thinking we're just going to pretend nothing happened, you're wrong. You made your choice when you picked the bottle over us. You don't get to come back when it's convenient. Something dark flashed in his eyes, but he swallowed it down. It's not like that. It's exactly like that. Silence stretched between us. Then his mask slipped, just for a second. The pathetic, apologetic act vanished, and in its place, I saw something uglier. Bitterness, resentment, like he was angry at me for not making this easy for him, like I was the selfish one for refusing to let him back in. And that's when I knew. He hadn't changed. He wasn't sorry. He was just out of options. I exhaled slowly, stepping back. You need to leave. His eyes flicked to my mother. Are you really going to let them talk to me like this? She flinched, staring into her coffee like it held all the answers in the world. And that told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't going to save herself. She never would. But I could. I clenched my jaw. Get out. He hesitated, like he was debating whether it was worth fighting, whether there was still a crack in the wall he could slip through. But he must have seen something in my face, something that told him I wasn't going to break this time. Because without another word, he pushed back his chair, grabbed his coat, and walked out the door. And my mother? She said nothing. She just sat there, staring at the table, gripping that damn mug like it was the only thing holding her together. And I realized, with a hollow sort of ache, that I had never felt more alone in my life. Days passed, then weeks. My father didn't come back. And my mother? She withered. Not physically. She still went through the motions, still did the laundry, still kept the house clean like she was preparing for a guest who would never arrive. But something in her had fractured. She didn't know how to exist without waiting for him to return. And I was so tired of waiting for her to choose us instead. One night, I found her sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a photo of my father. She didn't even look up when I walked in. I don't know who I am without him, she whispered. I swallowed hard. You could find out. She let out a broken laugh. I don't think I want to. Something in my chest twisted, because I knew what she meant. She had spent so long holding on to him, to the version of him that had existed before the drinking took over, that she didn't know how to let go. Even now, even when she should have hated him. And that's when I knew. I couldn't stay here. I had spent my whole life waiting for my father to change, waiting for my mother to choose herself, waiting for a family that no longer existed. But I wasn't a kid anymore. And I wasn't going to wait forever. The night I realized I had to leave, it wasn't some dramatic moment of clarity. There was no grand revelation, no screaming argument, no tragic last straw that pushed me over the edge. It was something much quieter than that. I was sitting at the kitchen table, watching my mother stir her tea in slow, absent-minded circles, her gaze unfocused, her expression empty. The television hummed in the background, playing a rerun of some show she wasn't really watching, the voices blending into the static of the house. She hadn't spoken more than a few words all evening. Not because she was angry, not because she was sad, but because she was just gone. Not physically, not yet, but in every way that mattered. And as I sat there watching the steam rise from her untouched cup, I realized something that settled into my bones like ice. She had already given up, on herself, on me, on everything. She just hadn't admitted it yet. And if I stayed here, if I kept waiting for her to wake up and choose something different, then one day, I would look just like her. Stuck, waiting for a man who was never coming back. and I refused to let that happen. The next morning I started making plans. Not big ones. Not yet. I wasn't running away overnight. I wasn't disappearing without a word. But I was getting out. Slowly. Carefully. Piece by piece. I picked up extra shifts at work, quietly tucking away whatever money I could. I started looking at apartments, scanning listings, checking prices, trying to figure out where I could go with what little I had. It wasn't much, but it was something. I had a plan that didn't involve saving anyone but myself. The only person who noticed the shift in me was my mother's sister, Aunt Evelyn. She had always been the black sheep of the family, the one who had cut ties with my father years ago, the one who had tried to warn my mother again and again that this wasn't a life worth holding on to. And of course, the one my mother had always ignored. She came by every so often, bringing groceries, checking in, making sure we were still breathing in the ruins of our home. My mother never said much when she visited, but I knew she liked the company, even if she would never admit it. It was Evelyn who caught me one afternoon, sitting at the dining table, flipping through apartment listings on my phone. She didn't say anything at first, just watched me for a long moment, then sat down across from me, folding her hands neatly on the table. "You're leaving," she said. It wasn't a question. I looked up at her, my heart thudding. I don't know yet." She gave me a pointed look. "You do?" I swallowed hard, glancing toward the living room, where my mother sat staring at the television, lost in some half-life she couldn't escape from. I exhaled. "I can't do this anymore." Evelyn nodded, her expression unreadable. "Good." I blinked. "You're not going to tell me I should stay?" Her lips curled into something wry and sad. Why the hell would I do that? I didn't have an answer, because I had spent so long being told that leaving was selfish, that choosing myself was some kind of betrayal, that I hadn't actually stopped to wonder if that was true at all. And the way Evelyn looked at me now, like she saw exactly what I was thinking, like she had once been in my exact place, told me everything I needed to know. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "If you wait for her permission, you'll never go." I swallowed. "She's my mother." "I know." A beat of silence. Then softly, "But you're not her caretaker." I looked down at my hands, my chest tight, because that was the part I had never really admitted out loud. I had spent my entire life trying to keep this family together, trying to pick up the broken pieces my father left behind, trying to hold on to my mother, even as she slowly disappeared into the weight of her own grief. And if I didn't walk away now, I never would. I exhaled, forcing myself to look Evelyn in the eye. "I don't know how to do this." She smiled, just a little. "You start small." The next few weeks felt like walking a tightrope. I moved carefully, slowly, trying not to tip my mother off too soon. I didn't want her to stop me, because I knew she would try. She would tell me that we were a family. She would tell me that she needed me. She would tell me that she couldn't do this alone. But the truth was, she had already been doing this alone for years. I had just been too afraid to admit it. So I packed things a little at a time, small enough to go unnoticed, little enough that it wouldn't feel sudden. I made arrangements. I figured out what I could afford, and I told myself that as soon as I had a place, I was gone. No more waiting, no more hoping. I was leaving. The night she finally realized it, it was an accident. I had been on the phone with Evelyn, talking about the lease I was about to sign, not realizing my mother was standing in the hallway, listening to every word. When I turned around and saw her standing there, her face pale, her hands shaking, I felt a bolt of guilt so sharp it nearly knocked me over. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just stared at me, her voice small, fragile, in a way I had never heard before. "You're really leaving?" I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "I have to." Her eyes darted away, landing on the floor. I thought we were in this together." I clenched my jaw. "We were." Her gaze snapped back up to mine. "Then why are you leaving?" I took a shaky breath. "Because if I stay, I'll disappear just like you did." The words hit her. I saw it in the way her lips parted, the way her breath stuttered. the way she blinked like I had just slapped her across the face. But I didn't take them back, because they were true. She swallowed, her expression crumbling. I don't know how to do this alone. I exhaled slowly. You're going to have to learn. A silence stretched between us, heavy, suffocating, full of everything we had never said out loud before. And I think, in that moment, she understood. That I wasn't angry, that I wasn't abandoning her, that I was just tired. And that this wasn't about choosing myself over her. It was about finally allowing myself to be something other than a lifeline for a drowning person who refused to swim. She turned away first, and this time, I didn't follow her, because I knew that if she was ever going to save herself, it had to be her choice, and I had already made mine. The day I left, my mother didn't come to the door. She knew what was happening, knew that my bags were packed, that my car was waiting in the driveway, that my new apartment, a tiny, barely furnished space that was entirely mine, was just a short drive away. But she stayed in her room, the door shut tight, the silence between us thick with everything we hadn't said. And I let her. Because this wasn't about convincing her to understand anymore. This was about me finally moving forward, even if she couldn't. I sat in my car for a long time before starting the engine. The house in front of me, the place that had held every fight, every broken promise, every night spent waiting for a father who never came home sober, looked smaller now. Like it wasn't as big as I had always imagined it. Like it had been shrinking for years, and I was only just realizing it. And maybe that was the hardest part. Not leaving, not walking away, but finally seeing it for what it was. A house, not a home. A collection of walls that had trapped me, not protected me. A place where I had spent too many years waiting for something that was never going to happen. I gripped the steering wheel, my chest tight. Then, slowly I put the car in drive and pulled away. And I didn't look back. At first, the quiet was unnerving. I had spent my entire life in survival mode, always listening for the slam of a door, always bracing for the sound of my father stumbling in, always waiting for my mother to break apart in front of me. But in my new apartment, there was none of that. No fighting, no walking on eggshells, no waiting for the next disaster to hit. Just peace. At first, I didn't know what to do with it. The silence felt too loud. The stillness felt unfamiliar. But slowly, day by day, choice by choice, I started figuring it out. I went to work without worrying about what I would come home to. I decorated my space with small things that made me happy. Plants I'd probably forget to water, thrifted furniture that didn't match, a bookshelf filled with stories that had nothing to do with loss or waiting. I started becoming someone new. Or maybe I was just becoming myself. My mother called me 3 weeks after I left. I almost didn't answer. Not because I was angry, not because I didn't care, but because I was terrified of being pulled back in, of hearing her voice and forgetting why I had left in the first place. But when I finally picked up, she didn't beg me to come home. She didn't tell me that I had betrayed her. She just sighed and said, "It's quiet without you here." I closed my eyes, gripping the phone. "Yeah," I said softly. "It's quiet here too." She was silent for a long moment. Then, hesitantly, "Are you okay?" The question almost broke me, because she had never really asked before. Not like this, not in a way that felt like she was asking as a mother, not as someone who needed me to stay. I swallowed hard. "Yeah, I think I am." Another pause. Then, "I'm glad." I blinked, not angry, not resentful, just accepting. I thought that maybe, just maybe, she was trying. Not for me, not for anyone else, but for herself. Months passed, seasons changed, and slowly, my mother and I started learning how to be in each other's lives in a different way. I still called her. She still called me. But our conversations weren't weighted down by obligation anymore. And one day, when I went back to visit, I noticed something different. The house was cleaner than before. Not just tidy, but different. Lighter. As if she had finally let go of the ghosts that had been haunting it for so long. She had started going to therapy. Started filling her days with things other than waiting. She still wasn't whole. Maybe she never would be. but she was trying, and that was enough. As for my father, I never saw him again. I heard from Evelyn once that he had moved to another town, living alone, drinking himself further into oblivion. Maybe that should have made me sad, but it didn't, because I had spent enough of my life mourning a man who was still alive. And now, he was nothing more than a closed chapter in a book I wasn't reading anymore. The years went on, and my life? It wasn't perfect, it wasn't magical, but it was mine.